Hello everyone, welcome to Adora. My name is Manal, I'm your verbal faculty, and in this session, we will be taking up a very simple chapter, communication. Now, what is communication? The most basic definition is that it's a process of exchanging information, ideas, thoughts, feelings, and emotions through speech, signals, writing, or behavior. So basically, you are just expressing what is in your mind and in your heart in front of or to another person. And you can decide whatever form you want to use to express your feelings and your ideas. You can decide to write, you can decide to speak it out, you can decide to use some sort of a behavior. For example, passive-aggressive behavior or sweet behavior or some sort of a gesture. For example, if someone did something good to you, then instead of just saying thank you, you might want to give them a treat. You might want to buy flowers for them, or you might want to do something nice in return. So you can choose the format of communication, the way in which you want to express your heart, but communication is very simply the process of connecting your brain and your heart to another person. The channel doesn't matter, and the channel is something that we will be discussing through various chapters throughout this subject. Now let's talk about the main steps that are involved in communication. The first step is understanding the purpose or the reason. Why are you saying what you're saying? Why are you writing what you are writing? Is there a reason? In today's world, a lot of people, they open their mouth without reason. They say things blankly, involuntarily, without even thinking. That's not really a good habit, and you should proactively try to avoid saying things or saying words just randomly, which have absolutely no meaning. You're just saying them because you're bored, because you haven't used your mouth in a long time, because your brain is completely zoned out, and so now it cannot decide whether it should open its mouth or not. Having proper purpose or reason before talking, before writing, makes you come across as a professional, charactered person with good personality. The second step is the contents of the message. Now, when you do decide to open your mouth, when you do decide to write an email, or when you do decide to act in a certain way, it's very important to determine what you want to include in that message. If the purpose of your communication is to just criticize a certain plan or a certain action that someone has committed, you have to be very careful about how you criticize. Your criticism should not turn into hate speech. You cannot pass hateful comments at the person, whether he is your friend, colleague, or enemy, because that will always backfire. It's not just enough to know what you want to say, but there is a whole different art in putting your thoughts into words and into the correct words that do not come across as sadistic, sarcastic, hurtful, or will not backfire, will not put you into some sort of a trouble later on. The third step, once you have decided the exact contents of your message, is to determine the medium or the channel of communication. As I said, there are lots of mediums, there are lots of media to communicate. You can use the internet, you can send a text message or a WhatsApp message, you can simply talk, you can use pictures, you can use gestures and actions and behaviors. So there are lots of ways, depending on what you want to say and who is the recipient, you can determine what format to use. If the recipient is your manager, the dean of the institute, your teacher, then you want to use a more formal method of communication, such as an email. You cannot just WhatsApp or send a text message to them. If the matter at hand, if the issue that you want to talk about is extremely urgent, then you want to forget about all the written formats and all the pictorial and gestures and you want to just use direct speech so that you can discuss the matter immediately, resolve it immediately without it taking much toll on your future, on your actions, etc. So depending on the message, you will decide what medium to use. The next step is transmitting the message. Now you've decided what is the medium. Now you have to make sure that the message reaches the person. So if you decided that your medium is an email, you wrote the entire email, you have to make sure that it reaches the concerned person, which means you need to have their email address. And you obviously have to have functioning internet. And then you have to have the guts to click the send button. The fifth step is to make sure that the messages or whatever you have sent is not misinterpreted due to some sort of external disturbances. Now, what do we characterize as external disturbances? Things such as noise, background noise, traffic, natural forces. All of these factors can lead to disoriented communication or disoriented information. For example, you may pick up the phone and try to convey a message to someone asking to meet you tomorrow at 12. But because of background noise, the person heard 10 instead of 12, and now the person reached the meeting point 2 hours early, has been waiting there for you, and is extremely frustrated and annoyed with you. And so by the time you meet the person to discuss whatever important thing that you wanted to discuss, you realize that the person is in such an annoyed mood that he or she does not want to calmly listen to whatever you wanted to say. So you have to make sure that there is no kind of miscommunication that can hamper your acts, your actions, your decisions, your job, anything. The next step is making sure that the person has received the message. So you hit the send button on the email, or you hit the send button on WhatsApp. You know the message has gone from your side, but you need to make sure that the other person received the message. Now on WhatsApp or Skype, these instant messaging apps, you may know if the person has received the message because you will get a double tick, or you'll get a blue tick, or you will just get a word written there which would say delivered or read. But when it comes to emails, you can't be sure if the person has opened their email, checked it, if the email bounced, went into their junk folder or their spam folders. So in such a case, you might want to follow up through a different method, or you might want to send a follow-up email asking for a confirmation. You want to just make sure that the person received the message. Now the next step in the process comes from the receiver's end. You as a sender have done all of your work in sending the message, in making sure that the communication process from your end is complete. But in order for proper communication to take place, both parties have to do their job. So it's not just the sender, but also the recipient who needs to make sure that he has not only received your message, but read it and acted upon it. So the next step is for the sender to decipher or decode the message that you sent. So whatever you have sent, whatever you have written, they will have to understand it. They'll have to understand the tone. They'll have to understand the reason or the ideology behind sending a certain email or a message. They need to understand that. The next step is interpreting and figuring out what the sender has tried to say. So whatever you tried to say, whatever you tried to convey, it's not just about reading it on the surface, but also interpreting what is the meaning behind it. If there is a hidden meaning, if it implies something else. So interpretation is also important. Let's start with types. Now you can broadly categorize communication based on the channels and the purpose. Let's start with channels because they are a bit easy. They're exhaustive, but they're easy. Now there are 3 channels of communication: verbal, non-verbal, and pictorial or visual. Let's start with verbal communication. Now verbal means use of words, use of language. But the minute I hear the word verbal, I'm immediately thinking that it's spoken communication. That's not true. Verbal simply means words or language. Now, those words can be spoken or they could be typed in a message, in an email, etc. So let's look at the different forms or subcategories of verbal communication. The first one is written communication. Now, how do you write information or how do you communicate in writing? There are various ways. You could go old school by writing letters, journals, documents, or modern school by writing emails or sending brochures, SMSs, chat platforms such as WhatsApp, Skype, Slack, etc. There are innumerable methods or modes of written communication in today's world because we live in a technology age and an electronic age. So we'll never run short of modes of written communication, but which mode we choose to use depends a lot on the purpose. Now we will talk about purpose-driven types of communications later, so maybe we can elaborate on this point a little later in this session. The next type of communication under the verbal section is oral communication. Now, oral communication is words which are simply spoken. Oral does not mean written. Now, when we speak words, once again, there are different ways. We could speak them face-to-face, telephonically, via some sort of a video chat, video conferencing, voice chat, etc. There could be other formal medium also, like lectures, conferences, seminars, meetings, informal conversations, chit-chat, gossip, etc. So there are different ways in which we can communicate information orally. The effectiveness of oral communication depends very strongly on the person's speech, pronunciations, how well they know the language, their tone, their voice, whether it is too high or too low, whether they are talking too fast or too slow. All of these things will impact oral communication. If you are going to scream at the top of your voice like Arnab Goswami, even the most basic and simplest piece of information will sound like a threat. If you're going to speak too softly, like some shy, timid student sitting on the back seat of a class, then you're going to sound very underconfident, and whatever you say, nobody will be able to hear or understand. Similarly, if there is a primarily English-speaking crowd and your English is not very strong, they might not understand what you are saying because you might make too many grammatical errors. Your pronunciation could be bad because you might come from a regional town or a city where the same words in the same language are just pronounced differently. So there are lots of things that will change the way you talk and the way people understand you. So oral communication is more difficult than written communication because written communication can be honed. You have a lot of online tools such as Grammarly that will correct your grammar, or any other tools that will make sure that you write correct formal words. But when it is oral, there is no correction because it directly comes from your mind to your mouth before somebody else can correct you. A lot of times with oral communication, you also have to be careful about your non-verbal cues, such as your body language, the way you move your hands, your eye movement, how fast or how strongly do you move your eyebrows, which will show whether you're curious or suspicious or apprehensive, whether you are standing with closed arms or with open arms, whether you are fidgeting too much. A lot of these things will also affect your speech. So let's quickly get on to non-verbal communication and see what are the aspects of those non-verbal communications, non-verbal cues, and how do they affect communication in general. So when I say non-verbal, I mean that there is absolutely no words, whether written or oral. There are no words that are being used. It's just body language. It's the aura, the attitude, the signals that you are sending and receiving without words. And a lot of signals can be sent and received without words. In fact, sometimes these nonverbal signals are more overwhelming and more informative in nature than the words themselves. So let's look at the subcategories under nonverbal communication. Let's start with the physical nonverbal cues. The physical nonverbal cues involve your body language, your facial expressions, your stance, gestures, tone of voice, touch, and a lot of other physical signals. As I said, the movement of your eyes, your hands, even the direction that you're standing in. For example, if the person who you're talking to is standing right in front of you, but instead of looking straight at the person or standing straight towards them, if you stand in a little sideways direction, it looks like you are not interested in the conversation, that you are talking to the person, but you are waiting for this communication to end so that you can just move in the other direction and walk out. So the way you stand will also determine how interested you are in the conversation. So you may be talking about an extremely, extremely important issue, but your body language may show that you are just not interested. Let's take another example. Leaning forward in a conversation like this may mean friendliness, acceptance, and interest. But if you cross your arms, it could be interpreted as antagonistic or defensive, meaning that somebody is arguing with you and you're not open to the argument. So you've crossed your arms because you do not want to take in whatever information, whatever aura that they're sending. Researchers, they estimate that physical non-verbal cues, they account for 55% of all communication. As I said, that you could be saying words, but your actions may show otherwise. So you could be giving someone compliments, but you might have a frown on your face. You could be smiling, but while smiling, you might actually be threatening or taunting people. You could be clenching your hands and pretending to be absolutely cool with something. So non-verbal communication makes up the majority of your communication today. Let's go to the second subcategory, paralanguage. What is paralanguage? This is the way you say something. So it has nothing to do with your body language, but with the way you pronounce your words, your voice quality, your intonation, your pitch, the stress and emotion in the words, your style of speaking. All of these will tell the person how strongly or passionately you feel about the topic. If you are stressing a lot on certain words while talking, it may mean that those words or that topic is very important to you. If you are talking in a very lackadaisical form, if you are using your words but they are very sloppy, you don't really care how you pronounce them or how you frame the sentences, it may mean that you're not really interested in the topic. You're just saying it because you're being paid to say it or because you're supposed to say it. According to research, the tone of the voice accounts for 38% of all communications. So even if the person cannot see you, even if it is a telephonic conversation or a voice call, based on the tone of your voice, the other person will be able to make out whether you are happy, sad, serious, kidding, etc. The next subcategory is aesthetic communication. Aesthetic communication involves art forms such as dancing, painting, sculpturing, music. So basically, if you cannot say things in words, then you can say them through art. You can say them through music. If you want to tell someone, I love you, but you cannot use your words, then you may dedicate a romantic song to them. If you want to express how frustrated you are from inside, but there's nobody to listen and understand, you could paint an image of someone trying to break free from a jail, wanting to break free from a jail. These kind of art forms, They distinctly convey the ideas and thoughts of the person. Of course, art forms are a little difficult to crack because the person who is receiving it should be adept with that form. If the recipient does not understand art, does not have any artistic nerve in his body, does not understand music at all, then no matter however you convey the information in whatever art form, the person is not going to understand. He'll just look at the art as, oh, beautiful painting. He'll listen to the music and say, oh, lovely song. He's not going to understand the in-depth meaning if he's not really an artistic person. So this kind of non-verbal communication should only be used when you are sure that your recipients will understand it. The next subsection under this category is appearance. Now, appearance is usually the first thing people notice about you. Even before you open your mouth, people will first notice your looks. They will see how well you are dressed, how you are groomed, how you sit, how you stand, how you walk, how you move your hands, your gestures, whether you are a sloppy or a shabby person. People will notice everything about your appearance. Is your hair combed or not? Are you smelling? Do you have any kind of body odor, or do you have a strong perfume on? Are your clothes ironed or wrinkled? Are your shoes cleaned or muddy? Are they old and torn and haggard, or are they new? Are your nails chipped, or are they properly filed and painted? All of these things build your personality. You may think that you can just walk into a professional environment wearing sloppy clothing, wearing some pajamas and a night t-shirt, and with bed hair. You're not going to make a good impression in front of all of these professional people sitting there in suits and skirts and dresses. So the way you dress, the way you act, and all of the accessories around you will determine what the person who is looking at you thinks about you. And you may be the most intelligent person in the room, but if you are dressed sloppily, if you are wearing unironed clothes and you don't comb your hair, which I know a lot of college students do, whatever comes out from your mouth, people will not want to take it seriously because they've got such a bad visual impression of you that they automatically have this mental block. They have automatically decided that whatever you say will be as sloppy as your dressing sense. This is the reason why the dress code in offices is generally formal. Because they want people to look their best so that when somebody talks to them, when other people are listening to them, they listen with open ears. They don't build wrong impressions about the office people. And if your boss has to send you out for some meeting or for some client work, you're not going around putting the wrong impression of yourself and the company and losing important revenue clients. The last subcategory under this one is symbols. Now, symbols are usually religious or ego building. For example, you may wear a cross on your neck, or somebody might wear multiple rings like Thanos did, one for anger, one for luck, one for love life, whatever, different kinds of rubies and stones. Some people may wear a lot of threads around their hand. These are all religious symbols. Then there are ego symbols. Symbols such as having a keychain with a knife on it or a tiger on it because that's your spirit animal. So these kind of symbols, they speak a lot. They speak volumes about your personality. If you've got religious symbols on you, you may come across as a religious person. So when somebody wants to have a discussion about religion, they might walk up to you. But when they're having a discussion which is anti-religion, agnostic, atheist, when they're talking about how politics is merging with religion, church and state coming together, they might not want to include you in the conversation. You may be a modern person mentally, but just because you have these religious symbols around it, You may be a modern person in your thoughts, but just because you're surrounded by religious symbols, you may not come across as an approachable person in terms of religious or political matters. Now let's get to the third category, which is visual communication. Visual communication uses visual aids. You may have signs, drawings, graphs, illustrations, colors, and other electronic resources such as pie charts or any videos, motion pictures, animation, etc. In some cases, visual communication can completely replace written or oral communications simply because visual is a very good form. It's a very popular and powerful medium of conveying information. For example, Charlie Chaplin, through his pantomime movies, he conveyed and he dealt with a lot of issues that society was dealing with at that time. He even created a movie about Hitler and about the Holocaust, and there was not a single dialogue. The movie was black and white, and it was just pantomime, it was just actions, and it was still so powerful. There are lots of motion pictures today. There are lots of people who are expressing things, or they're expressing meaningful ideas and issues through series of paintings, through series of colors, through series of images. So visual communication has become a very powerful medium today. A lot of people are visual learners. They recollect information when they see it rather than reading it. And so visual forms of communication have become as popular as written. Of course, the problem with visual communication is that it's time consuming. It's easier to list important issues in bullet format than creating a pie chart or creating a diagram. So obviously presentation takes time. Making movies and motion pictures takes even more time. So visual communication is more like a privileged form. You can only use it when you have the time and when the issue is so important that words will just not do it justice. In office environment, nowadays, visual representations have become an integral part because when it comes to revenue reports, when it comes to success or failure reports, any kind of marketing campaigns, even basic operational issues, it's best conveyed through pie charts and through flow charts rather than just putting bullet points in a meeting. But of course, as I said, even in an office environment, you need to give the employee enough time to create these pictorial representations. If you're going to say, I'm going to have a meeting with you right now in the next half an hour, you cannot expect the person to just put all the revenues and profit figures into a pie chart. Then the person is just going to come to you with bullet forms. So depending on how much time you have and how important the issue is, you can decide to go for visual. It's always better than verbal. Now let's look at formal and informal communications. Formal and informal communication depends on the purpose. Why are you writing the email? Whether the issue is professional or whether it is personal. Depending on that, you will decide whether you want to go formal or informal. Let's talk about formal communication first. Formal communication can be both written as well as oral, but it follows certain rules and regulations. It follows a certain format. The type of words used, the structure, all of them will depend on your purpose. Why are you writing the email? Who is the recipient? And how soon or how immediate or how urgent is the email? All of these things will determine what structure are you going to follow. Now, there are primarily three types of structures: vertical, horizontal, and diagonal. Let's talk about vertical. This is where information can flow either upwards or downwards in the organization, meaning that it could be coming from top management to all the lower management or the executive class people, or it could be going from the executive class people to the board of directors and the top management. Then we have horizontal communication. This is the type that happens between two parts of the organization. For example, between the sales department and the marketing department, the budgeting department and the product department. So different managers who are working on a certain project. You may have the budgeting or the finance manager, the product manager, and the marketing manager, all of them working on one particular project. So communication which happens between these managers would come under horizontal structures. And then you have diagonal structures. This refers to cross-functional communication between employees at different levels. So it could be the manager of the marketing team shooting an email to an executive in the accounts department. Two completely different teams, two completely different positions. This is information or emails which are going haywire. They can go anywhere in the organization. Does not mean that they are not important just because they are not following a certain hierarchy. They are equally important depending on the task, depending on the work. If you are in the same organization, it's absolutely fine shooting an email to any person in the company as long as you have worked with them. Diagonal communication is increasingly common in larger organizations because there is so much of hierarchy, so much of bureaucracy, that there is a chance that you might distort or misinterpret information going through different levels of the business or different levels of a department. So it's easier to just send direct mails to people when you are in a big organization. Now let's talk about informal communication. This is the kind of communication you have with your friends, with your family members. This is completely casual, it's completely friendly, and completely unofficial. Means it's off the record. There is no specific structure that is followed in this kind of communication. There may not be a specific purpose also. You might just be shooting out an email to a friend saying, hey, what's up? What's going on with you? All you want to do is catch up with the person. Actually, these days, nobody really says what's up on email. They actually say what's up on WhatsApp. But if you're an old school person, let's say you're a 50 or 60-year-old person, 70-year-old person, and you are still in the habit of sending memos and emails, or you prefer long-form communication, you can always send emails to your friends. That's also a very valid form of communication, even though it's not popular. Now let's talk about the networks in communication. Network in communication means the method or the pattern that is used by members of an organization to pass information to the other. It basically means what is the chain of information? In what order is information flowing in a company? Let's say, for example, I want to assign a certain content-related task to the content team. I come from the marketing department. I want someone from the content department to create a nice 200 or 250 word piece, which I can push out with all my marketing emailers and my marketing campaigns. Now, as the marketing manager, I send an email to one team member from the content department assigning this task. This might enrage the head of content. The manager of content might feel that I surpassed his or her authority and assigned work to his or her team member without asking permission. Which is why in organizations, in formal emails, people prefer to follow a certain hierarchy of communication, wherein I, as the manager, would send an email to the content manager. The content manager would then assign someone from his or her team and send an email to that person. And then that person may in turn email me saying that he or she has received this task and will start working on it from tomorrow or day after or whatever. So instead of having direct communication, it went in a circle. This is quite common in bureaucratic organizations where there are people who are sitting on very high positions with 10 and 20 years of experience, and so their ego is that much higher. Having an established network of communication helps managers and employees understand whom to get in touch with, when a certain work or task arises. A lot of companies these days, they have established and predefined networks of communication for specific ventures and specific tasks so as to avoid any kind of confusion and miscommunication or cross-firing of information, especially when the task at hand is urgent. Now, the structure of communication or the network of communication within a company, it will depend very highly or very heavily on the size of the organization, the type of the organization, the industry, whether it's a media organization or a finance, or whether it is a bureaucratic place like a government office. The size, whether it is a multinational large organization or whether it is a startup or a small or home business. The number of persons involved in the process. Some tasks are day-to-day minute tasks, which are only performed by a handful of people, but then sometimes you might have quarterly or 6-monthly or annual projects that you have taken up. So you might have 50 people working on one annual project. So depending on the number of persons involved, your network or structure of communication will be put into place. This is it for this session. I hope you enjoyed this session. This is Manal, your verbal faculty, signing off for now. Until we meet again, keep watching, keep learning. Video. Thank you.